Before we get started, I just wanted to remind you that I live here, not here. So for the sake of my sanity, any dollar amounts that I might bring up in this tour will be referring to Canadian dollars, unless otherwise specified. I just wanted to make that clear before I get 100 comments whining that I'm lying about the value of certain items, or that I grossly overpaid for something. At the time of filming, this is the value of the Canadian dollar, which is much weaker than the greenback, so if you're an American, these numbers will probably sound kind of high to you. Before we get started, I'm about to ramble a bit, so if you just want to get to the good stuff, feel free to skip to this point in the video. I won't blame you at all. All of last year, I teased on every one of my videos that if my channel hit 1,000 subscribers and I became monetized on YouTube, I would do a tour of my retro video game collection. I honestly didn't expect to hit this goal as quickly as we did, and I am humbled by your continued support. Having an audience that's willing to listen to my ramblings about gaming culture has always been a dream to me, and it's surreal that it's finally becoming a reality. So again, if you're new or if you've been subscribed to me for a while now, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. To ensure this video doesn't take like 6 months to make, it's not going to be scripted and edited like my usual uploads. Apart from this part right now, I have a few notes written down here that I'm reading off of, but it's going to be very off the cuff. Rest assured, the more chill video essays you subscribed for initially are on the way. This is just a special video to kick off the year and fulfill my promise to everyone who has decided to stick around with. Who knows, if you guys like it and it performs well, I might do a follow-up down the road. Finally, I'd like to take this opportunity to somewhat temper expectations a little bit. This is YouTube after all, and I'm sure that you've seen some crazy multi-million-dollar game tours from people who have either been collecting longer than I've been alive or are fabulously wealthy. Despite whatever clickbait title and thumbnail I've inevitably made for this video, this isn't going to be like Last Gamer or anything like that. I'm just a millennial from Canada who has gotten very lucky and picked up most of his collection in the right place at the right time before their prices became unjustifiable to most. To be perfectly frank with you, if I had to buy it all over again in 2024 at its current market rate, I wouldn't be able to afford it. If you want to hear me talk about the retro games market at length and the effects that 2020 had on it, check out my video called DK Oldies is a Scam, Here's Why, in which I explore that topic in greater detail. But enough intro, let's get to the good stuff. Okay everybody, so basically what I decided on how I'm going to do this video is I'm just going to be walking around my basement holding the microphone in handheld, rambling about different things that I see, and then I will film B-roll to show you on video and illustrate what I am talking about. I'm doing this because I don't really have a cameraman or anything, or any real way that I'm set up for to have the camera follow me or do anything interesting while I am talking, or even just be stationary, and so we will just bear with me here. Hopefully it turns out okay. I'm usually not on camera anyway for my videos, so maybe this is just the best way to do it. Starting out, so above this little closet here, I have a space for my older, more retro games. At the top here you can see we've got big box Atari game, we got some DK Bongos, complete in box Don't Panic Seaman for the Dreamcast. This is actually one of my favorite pieces that I own. Maybe I should think about moving it to a more visible location in the game room now that I'm thinking about it here. But that is a game that I would like to do a full video on, so stay tuned. Maybe sometime this year I will get to that. Here I've got my Atari 2600 games, got a Jaguar game up there, a couple 32X stuff, That's an area that I'm really lacking on in my collection. I know there weren't very many 32X games released, but it would be cool to pick up a few more of those. Same thing with Jaguar, but you know, they're both so niche. You really don't see, even in like retro game stores, you don't see a lot of those for sale. And if you do, they tend to be a little on the pricier side these days. Next up, we got a bunch of NES games and a couple of Famicom games. I don't have a Famicom, I just have an NES, and the way that I play the Famicom games on my NES is I use this little adapter here that I think I bought for like 15-20 bucks off of Amazon, and works well enough. It just converts, I think, the pin numbers from Famicom to NES. So just a simple little trick that doesn't involve you modding your NES in any way if you just want to play some Famicom games. And they are cheaper. They are a lot cheaper to buy than the North American counterparts, so I could understand if you want to primarily collect the Japanese games. Underneath that, here we've got SNES games and Super Famicom. Now, the way I play Super Famicom games, because I don't have a Super Famicom, I just have a North American SNES. It's a little bit more of a destructive mod. I have a video on my channel about how to do it, but there are a couple little plastic tabs in the SNES. They're sticking up and they prevent you from physically inserting Super Famicom games into your SNES, and if you just break off those tabs, then you can put in the Super Famicom game into your North American SNES, and it just plays, because the hardware is identical. It's just a bit of just a physical thing. You just break off two little tabs with a pair of pliers, and they're just inside, and you don't even have to take the console apart to do it. You just kind of reach in the flaps, and yeah. Some people might be a little bit squeamish about doing that because it is technically like a destructive mod, so to speak, but personally I think that it is worth it. It is super fast and easy and cheap, and it's not like you see the tabs anyway. You'd have to like really like go looking for it, so it doesn't change the outward appearance of your console or what not. Next up, we've got N64 games. If you're wondering about these labels, no, I did not purchase the label set on Etsy or eBay or what have you. There are I see a lot of collectors. You can buy for like 30 bucks or whatever a label set of every N64 game ever made, and you just stick the end labels on yourself. What I did that I found to be a little bit cheaper is I bought special printer paper that is like sticker paper, and I resized the logos myself in Microsoft Word and then printed off the ones that I wanted, which it is more work, I give you that, but it ended up being a bit cheaper. Got a bunch of random Genesis games. Most of these were bought in like bundles or with the console or whatnot. They kind of threw them in. So a lot of random sports titles that I don't particularly care about, but oh well, I've got them. A handful of Master System games. I think the Master System is a really cool console that a lot of people overlook. And then we've got some old school PC games from the 90s. Some stuff that I grew up with playing on Windows 95. We've got things like the Tonka games, Monopoly, Mysterious Journey 2, that's a cool game. If you like puzzle adventure stuff in the vein of like Myst or what have you. Then we've come across something that you might be a little less familiar with here. We've got my Hyperscan collection. Now, I have reason to believe that I might be the only Canadian with a complete Hyperscan collection, and it was actually kind of hard at the time to track down every Hyperscan game. There are only 5 of them, granted, so it is one of the easier consoles to get a full set for, so to speak. It's not like you're collecting 1,000 games, but a couple of them were very difficult to track down, at least in 2021 when I was doing that. I definitely want to make a video on the Hyperscan at some point here. It's a very cool concept that was just executed incredibly poorly. So it's a cool story, interesting console where you get these like trading cards in booster packs like it's Magic the Gathering or Yu-Gi-Oh, except they have NFC tags in them, and you are supposed to scan them for like characters or levels, what have you. I'll go more into depth on that in its own video at some point, probably later this year. After that, we've got some Zapit Gamewave games. It's the only Canadian video game console, and again, incredible story behind that. Very terrible console. Really just have it for collection purposes. I don't actively play it, but I would also like to do a video on that at some point. Then we've got some movies. These are HD DVDs, and I just have a few HD DVDs because I have the Xbox 360 HD DVD player, and I thought I should have a few HD DVDs to put in said player. Not something that I use very often, but it is cool to show off and a neat little part of history, especially if you were around and remember the HD wars of, what was it, like 2006 or something like that. I have a video on HD DVD versus Blu-ray if you want to check that out. Next up, these are not original games, these are actually some burned ISOs for the Bandai Playdia. The games are basically impossible to find, or very expensive if you do, so luckily there's no copy protection on this Japanese-only console. The games are basically episodes of anime, where they pause every once in a while, and then it's like a little menu where you do like a choose-your-own-adventure type deal. You kind of choose where the anime is going to go next. There's, you know, Super Sentai, Dragon Ball Z, Sailor Moon, stuff like that. Kind of cool. There's a couple episodes of Dragon Ball Z that are exclusive to this platform, so you can't see them any other way. I mean, maybe someone's uploaded them to YouTube or whatnot, but at the time, this was the only way that you could actually watch those episodes. Kind of interesting. Got some Sega CD stuff. Got the Saturn Action Replay that everyone who owns a Saturn should have. Doubles the RAM, does region unlocking, and gives you like a bunch of cheats and stuff, which I was never into like the Game Shark type stuff, but I really just got it for the region unlocking because I have a Japanese Saturn console. Here are just a handful of Saturn games. I'd like to expand my Saturn library at some point. I actually have a considerable amount of Phillips CDi games here. The most notable, of course, are the heavily memed on Zelda and Mario games. You've probably seen YouTube poops or many memes made from these crudely drawn cutscenes that are in these games. I even made a video all about those ones. I think it's called Nintendo's Greatest Regret, something along those lines. I'll have it up on the screen here. But very, very, very cool. Those were basically the reason why I purchased my CDi and imported it from the Netherlands. All these games came from the Netherlands as well. A lot of them are actually in Dutch, which was very interesting for a couple of Dutch friends that I have. They're of Dutch heritage, so they found it quite interesting. I love these games. I'm glad that I purchased them when I did. As I'm sure you are aware, they are quite expensive in 2024. Now, I was lucky enough to purchase them for like 80 bucks a piece in 2019. I think they're going for over 300 each now. The Hotel Mario I got for, I think, $100, and I think it's doubled since I purchased it. So overall, very happy that I was able to get those when I did, because I don't think that I would be able to justify purchasing those at the price they currently are. Notably, the Nintendo CDi games that I don't have, that I very much regret not picking up when I could have, is Zelda's Adventure, which is like the top-down one that doesn't have the memeable cutscenes, so most people aren't even familiar with that one. I think it was about $400 when I was buying these other titles, and I thought, nah, that's a bit too much for me. But now it's worth like $2,000, so I probably should have picked that up, but it's too late. I'm not gonna spend a couple grand on that. So that's ridiculous, even for me. Moving on, we got some Dreamcast games. Really, the notable ones are, of course, Shenmue 1, which is my favorite game of all time. and Seaman, which I talked about earlier. Just going through the 3 discs of Shenmue is such a magical experience on original hardware. I mean, you could play through Shenmue on a PS4 or PC. They have done the HD re-releases, which are very cheap and very accessible then for just about anyone to play through. You don't need a Dreamcast to play through Shenmue, but I'm really big into playing things on original hardware. I just think it's like there's a magic that's lost when you play a remake. But that's just me. Over here we got some big box, or the long box, I guess you call them, PS1 games. You know, you got like the Tekken, the Rayman, Mortal Kombat, the original Need for Speed. Just some classics there. And, you know, Wii Balance Board, Guitar Hero controller, not much more in here. This is where I keep the oldest stuff. Oh, I almost forgot to mention, I got a couple of Xavix Port games over here. These are really interesting. I'd like to do a video on the Xavix Port at some point, because it's such a weird console that most people are not familiar with. Some people like to call it like the Wii before the Wii, because it's heavy focus on motion control and sports games. But there's a lot more going on than it being like a Wii clone or something. And it came out before the Wii, so it can't be a Wii clone, but you know what I mean. The games actually have the RAM and a processor in the game cartridge. So the console itself is more like a vessel, I suppose, like a dock, like a docking system. Kind of like how the Nintendo Switch docks to get onto the TV, but the Xavix Port just doesn't have a handheld mode or whatever. It's a very interesting design. They use these really old processors in order to make it financially viable to put a CPU in every game cartridge. Kind of a ridiculous design, but a very interesting part of gaming history that most people have missed. Moving on, here's the main shelves where I have most of my games. We got a fair amount of PS5 games, big box version of Air Twister here. Highly recommend Air Twister if you like rail shooters. And we've got a few big box PS4 games, like the Senran Kagura stuff. I love the Japanese big box games. They always do collector's editions so much better than Western games do. They're always like the same price as a standard new game, and then they just come with so many goodies. It's always like hardcover art books or beach towels, like in this To Love Ru Vita game, or soundtracks, a lot of soundtrack CDs, sticker books, and all kinds of interesting stuff that is just fun. Here we got a bunch of standard PS3 stuff, nothing really standout or noteworthy. Bunch of PS2 games, really just standard stuff, GTA, Tekken, things like that. This is probably the saddest little corner of my collection, is the Xbox One section. There are like no Xbox One exclusives, essentially. So like really, like what a sad console. There, I want to feel bad saying that, because I want Xbox to thrive and do well, but they really lost that generation, and unfortunately that would, you know, kind of mark the trajectory of them as a brand to present day. As much as I like my Xbox, but it's like I never turn it on. There's nothing to do on it, at least not compared to everything else. I should note that I have a gaming PC, so if you don't have a gaming PC, yes, Game Pass is a really good deal, and there is a ton of stuff that a ton of experiences you could have on the Xbox. And if you're not in the position where you also have a gaming PC, then yes, it makes a lot more sense. But I would rather just play basically everything that comes out on Xbox on my PC instead. We got some OG Xbox games, a lot of Dead or Alive. I'm a big fan of fighting games, big fan of the Dead or Alive franchise. I have the Burger King games, like Sneak King and Pocket Bike Racers. I made a video not too long ago, maybe a month ago, about those, so check that out if you're not familiar. Very, very funny, very interesting little intersection of advertising and gaming. Moving on, I got GameCube games. This was a console that I had when it was new, so I've got a lot more stuff that I was into at the time. This is a console that, you know, games are only appreciating for the GameCube. I think that in that generation, I think it's the 6th generation, the games are the most expensive. Like if you have a game that released on the original Xbox, the PS2, and the GameCube version is going to be the priciest, basically always. And if you, at this point, we're past the trough of value of GameCube games, so if you see a GameCube game for like under 20 bucks or whatever, probably just pick it up, regardless of, even if it's like a sports game that, like, traditionally gamers know that like old sports games are quote unquote worthless, but GameCube is pretty much the exception to that. Like, I'm pretty sure that these are like appreciating, not very much, mind you, like, don't get me wrong, don't quit your day job and start day trading Madden 2005, that's not what I'm saying, but you can find like a football game for like $3 or whatever. Like, that's like the price of a Slurpee or whatever, right? So you should probably just pick it up, even if you're going to sell it in like 5 years for a bit more than that. Speaking of selling, to be clear, I might talk about games as quote-unquote investments, or the value appreciating or depreciating. I don't sell my games. I have no interest in downsizing or selling the stuff that I have. I just find the analysis of their value to be interesting. So I am not a flipper. I do not make purchases solely because I think that they are going to be valuable in the future, or that I can make a bunch of money off of it. That is not something that I have interest in, but following the trajectory of their values is kind of interesting to me, purely for sport, so to speak. Here is the console, kind of the elephant in the room for my collection. I have a ton of Wii games. Like, I have more Wii games than most people do. Obviously, I am not anywhere near a full set. I am not like that one guy on YouTube who has like 1,600 Wii games, like every NTSC Wii game that ever released or whatever. Like, that's kind of psychotic. Actually, like, super expensive. I try to do that, and very difficult. There's just like so much to keep track of. Yeah, so I am not I'm not going for a full set. There was a point several years ago that I was strongly considering kind of casually going for a full set, but I think that is not in the cards anymore. I've realized that that's kind of ridiculous, and I'm not gonna do that. Substandard titles on the Wii: Budokai Tenkaichi 3. Say what you want about the motion controls. I do think the Wiimote and Nunchuck are the ultimate control scheme for that game, and I will argue with you on that till the cows come home. I do not care. PS2 bros, come at me in the comments. I don't care. We've got Godzilla Unleashed. That's a good quote-unquote gem. I don't know if you can call it a gem. A lot of people sing its praises. Of course, like, all the first-party Nintendo games are fantastic on the Wii, but some games that are fun to play with friends that are not like the most amazing games ever, obviously, but they are a ton of fun. They're like pseudo shovelware. I hesitate to call them shovelware because they are not they're not buggy or anything. They're just not like super AAA titles, but they are a ton of fun to play with friends because they have just the right amount of jank. Is the Winter Sports games. So we got Winter Sports, The Ultimate Challenge, Winter Sports 2, and Winter Sports 3. And then they also made a summer variant. I think it's just called Summer Sports. I'll have it on the screen here. These are all a blast to play if you can get like 3 or 4 friends together. And you know, they're a little janky. Sometimes some of the games with the controls are, and for some reason the announcers in the games they're kind of dicks. They will criticize everything you do, but overall is a really fun time. Just a couple weeks ago I had a couple friends over and we played a bunch of Winter Sports 1, and it was a blast. We were laughing until we cried at some points. especially on that curling game where the the controls are pretty ridiculous. So on top of these shelves, I have a few things worth noting. I've got the Bayonetta 3 Collector's Edition. I have a Hyperscan controller sealed. This is never opened. I got a Wii Speak, which is, you know, some people haven't heard of this thing. It's kind of useless. I've got the Sword and Fairy Collector's Edition, which is actually kind of a cool action RPG that I'm still playing through. Haven't finished that yet, but I appreciate it when companies do these giant box collector's editions with like plushies and all kinds of stuff in them. And then I have a sealed Senran Kagura X Neptunia Ninja Wars. This is a funny story. The reason why this is sealed, and I'm usually not like a big sealed guy. I don't care about keeping my games sealed, I actually want to play them. But I pre-ordered the collector's edition of this game, and the collector's edition was actually, the release was postponed by like a week or so. And the company that makes these games, or the publisher, sorry, sent out an email to everyone who had pre-ordered the collector's edition and profusely apologizing that they would have to wait to get their hands on the collector's edition, and they just sent everyone a download code for the digital version of the game as an apology. So I was able to play through the game in its entirety on my PS4 and have the digital version, as well as receive the collector's box later on. So I just decided to keep it sealed because I didn't need to open it, and it is now worth twice what I paid for it. So that is just, you know, that's pretty cool. Leave it to a Japanese company to be that consumer friendly with like being embarrassed about having to push a game title back or whatnot. I feel like an American publisher would just be like, well, you have to deal with it. Moving on, here we have my main console collection space. This is kind of like the main area of the room. Just a couple weeks ago, I completely redid this space. These shelving units are brand new. Before, it looked a lot worse in my opinion. Like, there was still like all these consoles, right? So it looked impressive, but I never thought that it looked clean. It was basically two bookshelves connected with a plank of wood, and then all the consoles kind of sitting on top of each other in a big mess. And it looked impressive because there were so many, but it was a mess. It looked ugly. I thought it looked bad. I never really liked the super messy aesthetic that I had going on for years, and it took a lot of planning and several weeks to kind of come up with a strategy to make everything look a lot cleaner here. And I worked really hard on coming up with a layout that would accommodate my absurd amount of consoles while they are all connected, because that's the big thing about my collection, is that every single console that you see here is hooked up to power and internet and video, and they're all going through this switching system that you can see here that then goes through a audio like surround sound receiver and then into a 4K projector. So at the flick of a couple switches, I can be playing any of my collection at a moment's notice. And I thought that was really important because I've seen a lot of conversation about this on gaming collecting forums, where some people who have collections like this insist that they just have things unplugged and stored away in like tubs, or maybe they're on shelves and just not plugged in, and when they want to play like their NES, so to say, let's say for example, they have to pull it off the shelf, they have to wire it up, and they have to like be very, very committed, right? Like that's too much friction for me. Like if I have a guest over, or if I want to play something retro, I don't want it to be I want it to be that much work, because then I would just only play the modern consoles that are hooked up all the time. And I'd be like, oh, do I want to play my N64 a bit? No, I don't feel like dragging it out of the closet. or hooking it up, I'll just go back to the PS5. And I didn't want it to be like that. I wanted it to be like any of these old retro consoles are just as quick to bring up as my PS5 or Series X or Nintendo Switch. I also wanted it to be easy for me to play these things on stream or capture gameplay. You're probably wondering how that works. I guess I should just go over the switching and how the video switching works. So I have 2 HDMI switches and 3 RCA switches, and they are all plugged in series. So I guess the master switch that you could say is the 4K switch on the leftmost side here, that I have my Series X, Nintendo Switch, Xbox One, and PS5 plugged into, and then also it is plugged into the 1080p switch, which I have the Wii U, 360, PS3, PS4, and the last one goes to a converter box that converts from HDMI to RCA. And so it goes to the first RCA box, of which you can see which consoles here are connected. I don't have to read them all off. And if I hit the last button on this RCA switch, it goes to the next RCA switch. And I have access to these consoles. And again, if I hit the last button, that number 8, it goes to the final RCA switch, and which I can access these consoles. So basically what happens is I determine what console I want to play first. Then I turn the power to that area, because I have these 4 big power delivery units here that do basically sections of my collection, so I don't have to have power going to every single console simultaneously. I basically just turn on a section of my collection at a time, and then I determine what console I want to use. So let's say I wanted to play something that is retro. So let's say the N64, for example. I would find where's the N64 power on here. So it would be the 3rd unit down here. So I would turn that on, and then on the switch, the first switch takes precedent, right? So it's left to right of what takes precedent. So I would go to number 1 on the first switch, which then goes to the second HDMI switch, and since I still want to play an old school RCA console, I'll go to the last one as it's labeled RCA. And then I find on the first switch here, number 3 is N64, so I press in 3. This sounds really complicated when I lay it all like this, but it literally takes like 5 seconds for me to switch between any given console that I want to play. Once you get used to it, it's actually a pretty elegant system that allows everything to be plugged in simultaneously. Coming out of the master switch at the front is actually, it goes into a 4K HDMI splitter that goes to 2 places. The first place is this Yamaha audio receiver that then passes through to my 4K projector. So that way I have surround sound and can project my games onto the wall. And the other place that it goes is around the perimeter of this basement into my PC, into a capture card, so that I can capture gameplay or stream to Twitch very easily. Or if I'm not capturing gameplay or streaming to Twitch, maybe I just want to sit at my computer, watch a YouTube video in my second monitor, and then play a game in my primary monitor. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the way I designed all of this to work, and it works pretty easily. There's very little friction to playing any of my consoles. So moving on, I guess I got a little bit of a charge station going on here. A few of the rechargeable controllers I have are on their own little charge stations. That way they are ready to go whenever. There's miscellaneous storage on this little tower here, and at the bottom I have the remotes for the Zapit Gamewave. Again, I'll probably do a dedicated video on that at some other time. Over here I've got kind of the messiest area of my basement. It is a trading card table where I've done card unboxings in the past, like streaming to Twitch. I also store the cards that I have for sale on a little eBay store where I mostly sell Yu-Gi-Oh! Long term, I am not sure if I'm going to keep this table here. It does kind of take away from how clean the rest of things look. Ancient coffee table, I'm probably going to replace this at some point. Also ancient sofa that was like a hand-me-down from my parents that they had for like probably longer than I've been alive. Not very comfortable. Definitely feel my butt hurt after I sit on it for too long. Feel like long term I'm going to replace that with like movie theater style chairs. Real quick here before I forget, I highly recommend you pick up a Player 2 for yourself. They tend to take up quite a bit of space though, so maybe not great if you live in an apartment.
Have some water.
No. Alright, over here we got my pachinko machine. Yes, this is a real authentic Japanese pachinko machine that was in a pachinko parlor at one point. This is an Evangelion, I think it's a EVA 10 Speedball Special Edition. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that's the model. Very cool. I am actually a big fan of having this. I think it's a really cool conversation piece, and it is actually kind of fun to play. I'm not a gambler, I've never been into gambling, but this isn't gambling because I own the machine, right? Like I'm not I'm not going to a casino, I'm not going to a pachinko parlor in Japan and spending money. I just play it for fun sometimes. And it's a really cool piece for when a new guest comes over and I'm showing them this space. It's something that most Westerners don't know exists, or if they do know it exists, they've never actually seen one in person, they've never been hands-on, so it's kind of cool. Of course I have the Evangelion statues on top of it because that's part of the theme. The way that I got this was that there is a company in South Carolina called Clover Collectibles. I highly recommend, if you want a pachinko machine and you live in North America, to buy from them. They have the absolute best customer service I think I've ever experienced from anyone ever, and they are somewhat reasonably priced. What they do is they import the machines from Japan and then they stick power inverters on them so that they can be plugged into North American power and not explode, which is great because it takes forever and it costs a lot of money to get something this heavy across the ocean and then across the country or across border from the US to Canada in my case. And yeah, you definitely don't want anything bad to happen to it at that point. It's also very loud. It's very bright, very loud. So if you live in an apartment or you have sensitive family members or roommates, maybe not a machine for you. I also almost broke my back trying to carry this thing down here a couple of years ago when I first bought it. So there is that. Oh, another thing that Clover Collectibles does is that they wire these potentiometers to the speakers because traditionally they are just trying to be as loud as possible and it is grating. So having that volume control added to it is actually really nice. The potentiometers are kind of bare, the ones that they include, so I 3D printed these knobs to stick on top of them, and I think it turned out pretty okay. Alright, moving on, I've got my handheld section of the collection. We got a couple PS Vitas, so the slim version as well as the OLED version, a couple of PSP 1000s, original Game Boy, Game Gear, Switch Lite. This is the Pokemon Gen 8 Special Edition Switch Lite. We got the Game Boy Color in Atomic Purple, that's my favorite color for the Game Boy Color. The Game Boy Advance, the Japanese Game Boy Advance that is in Fuchsia Pink, which is my favorite color for the Game Boy Advance. I really like pink, really like my pinks and purples, and the translucent plastic style from that era is to die for. Then we have my childhood Game Boy Advance SP in lime green, Nintendo DS Lite, 3DS, 3DS XL, which is the Gen 7 Special Edition. I have a little PlayStation TV, which if you don't know is like a PlayStation Vita hardware stuck into a little box that you can play on your television. These didn't sell very well, but they're an interesting part of history, and I 3D printed a shroud for it that makes it look like a miniature PS5, and I think that is very cute. Then I have the latest addition to my collection down here. I got this like less than a week ago. It is the Bandai Wonderswan. It's a console that never released outside of Japan. I'm probably going to do a video on it pretty soon. well, maybe I won't promise pretty soon, but at some point I'll do a video on it. I think it's a cool little console, very cute. Here is my Pokemon collection. These are all the mainline Pokemon games, and I am super glad that I bought them when I did. I bought them right before COVID, and as a result, I paid a fraction of what they go for now. I thought that I was spending a decent chunk of change at the time, and then like 3 months later, they all like quintupled in value. So I am very fortunate that on the timing of that. If you're wondering what's going on here with some of the older ones and how they could be in these plastic cases, no, these are not first-party cases, obviously. Prior to the Nintendo DS, handheld Nintendo games came in cardboard boxes, which most children just promptly threw in the trash. There are some people that are very passionate about collecting the complete in-box old-school games that are in their cardboard boxes, and there's a whole industry of protective casings for these types of things. That is a bit too much for my taste. Very expensive, very hardcore. Not for me. So what I did was I bought the loose versions of these games, and I did what Scott the Woz does. I actually discovered this company not from Scott, but he is a notable creator on YouTube who also swears by this company. It's called customgamecases.com. It's just a little outfit. It takes them a while sometimes to ship out, to make these and ship them out. I think it's just one guy or maybe a couple guys, but I think they do a really good job. They're Nintendo DS style cases, and I mean they do all kinds of stuff. They'll do like replacement cases for like Genesis games, NES, SNES, all kinds of stuff. They make plastic cases for your loose video games, and I think they do a really good job. It just makes it look so much more clean to have something like this on your shelf if your games are just going to be loose otherwise. And especially for these Pokemon games, I think that it just looks really cool to have them all next to each other. I have some DS games, 3DS games, nothing really of note. I got the double pack. This is a unopened double pack, Pokemon Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon. One of the few sealed games in my collection. We've got some PSP games, some Vita games. This big box one, Valkyrie Drive. You might be wondering about that. I'm probably going to make a video on this game because it is noteworthy, but not for the reason that you might suspect. It is one of the most banned video games on the planet. Many, many, many countries, both Western and otherwise, have banned this game for various reasons. And it is kind of an interesting story. So, probably going to make a video on that and maybe some other banned games at some point. But I thought, when I discovered this was the case, and I thought it's kind of comical because it's a bunch of, you know, anime girls on the cover, and you think, oh, why is this banned? But it is, so I decided to pick that up. Again, Japan does the coolest big box, like collector's editions of their video games. Gotta love it. Over here we got a few paltry Wii U titles. That's one console that I'd like to expand my collection for. And then some Switch games. Really just the standard stuff. No super interesting Nintendo Switch games. Like Switch Sports, Pokemon, Mario, Zeldas, everything that you would expect. If you're wondering what this little black box is, this is my NAS. This is a Synology network attached storage. It is the DS 1522 Plus, if you were curious, assuming most of you aren't. It has 5 8-terabyte hard drives in it, and this is basically where I store all my music, movies, pictures, any kind of projects that I'm working on, like the project that you are watching currently. Any kind of footage that I take or anything that I'm editing lives on here so that I can access it from multiple computers. So if I'm on my main desktop and I am downloading gameplay off of YouTube for use in a video, it goes right on the NAS, and then my video editing computer, I can then pull it off of the NAS to work off of. It's very convenient. It also offers some fault tolerance for if a hard drive fails. It is running in a RAID 5 configuration, which for the layman watching just means that a drive can fail and I will not lose any data. I just stick a brand new drive to replace the one that died, and it rebuilds the data that was lost. Overall, very important unit to have down here for any content creator or just people who want to store a lot of data and care about losing it. I actually used to do custom built NASs. I work in IT, if you can't tell, as my day job, and I used to build custom PCs that would be NASs for me, which was cheaper up front, but ultimately more expensive in the long term as they suck up a lot more power. Depending on how you build them, I suppose. I was doing them cheap and dirty, so they were kind of power hungry, they let off a lot of heat, and they were quite loud, which was annoying considering they were placed quite close to where I normally sit and record, so I would have to like turn them off before I like record my voice for like a video or something. It was overall not worth it. I would not recommend. These pre-built, ready-to-go NAS units from like Synology and QNAP are quite expensive in comparison, but in my opinion, it has been very much worth getting. All right, moving on. This is, yeah, this is real. No, I will not elaborate. Over here is my fight sticks, both purchased and built. I'm really into 3D printing, so I 3D printed this orange and black one. It's wrapped in like a fake carbon fiber wrap, and that was someone else's design. I found it on like Cults 3D or whatever. But then I wanted to go the extra mile and design my own fight stick from the ground up. So I used CAD software to design my ideal fight stick. Even the hinges here are 3D printed. I will admit I didn't design the hinges. I used an open source design for the hinges, but everything else about this was my design, from like the magnetic latch to the shape and the size and the spacing between things. It's all powered by a Raspberry Pi Pico running a firmware, really cool firmware called GP 2048 Community Edition, which is just a great community around it. There's tons of support. If you need help, the mods are very friendly, and they basically run out of a Discord server, and there are frequent updates. And it's very powerful firmware. It allows for things like adding LEDs or this little OLED screen that I put in mine. The screen shows real-time button inputs as well as like what mode the stick is in. I think this is really cool. If you're wondering about the weird color that I chose to print this in, this kind of weird like whitish gray, it's actually because it is glow-in-the-dark PLA filament. So this one is glow-in-the-dark blue, which is, I think, is pretty cool. The stick and the buttons are made by Sanwa Denshi, and it just uses a USB to plug into a computer or console. And this is what I will be using to play Tekken 8 with when that comes out later this month. I'm very excited. Under that, I've got a 16-port network switch. That's what a lot of the consoles that have hardwire Ethernet capabilities are plugged into. And next to it, I have a UPS that the NAS is plugged into. The UPS is, think of it like a surge protector with a battery in it, so that if the power goes out, it communicates via USB cable to my NAS, and the NAS knows to gracefully turn itself off. And then when power is restored, it tells the NAS that power is back, and it turns itself back on. That way, it does not, nothing gets damaged, basically, in the event of like a power outage. Moving on, we've got my guitars, or a few of my guitars, the ones that I keep out. I've got a couple more than this, but these are my main ones. I've got a couple of 6-string Schecter guitars. Schecter is my favorite guitar company, closely followed by Jackson and Ibanez. I don't have any Ibanez guitars, but this is a Jackson 8-string. It's my latest purchase that I got, I think, a year or two ago now. I always wanted an 8-string guitar, and I found a good deal on a used one. That was this one. and it is really cool. If you're curious, if you're a guitarist, I use Ernie Ball strings. Really like the Cobalt strings that they have. And this is a Marshall amp that doesn't get used very often. I'm a very quiet person, so usually I just plug in my guitar to my computer and use effects and whatnot through Logic Pro, which is the digital audio workstation that I use. Speaking of music composition, this is my music area. I have a Machine Mark III and a Native Instruments Complete Control S88 for the keyboard. Basically my dream keyboard setup. I will fully admit that I am not a pianist by trade. I am a guitarist. I've been playing guitar since I was 10 years old, but so much modern music production happens on a keyboard. It's basically all the other instruments. So I find myself using this thing quite often. It's not like I'd be able to perform something live, but in a production setting, it comes in very useful. I've got a couple screens here that I can use to navigate different plugins, and I am a Mac user when it comes to music production. So I use this 2017 MacBook Pro with a second monitor, and I am using Logic Pro as my digital audio workstation of choice. Also, this is the machine that I am editing this very video on, as well as every video that I ever edit on. All of my YouTube stuff is done in Final Cut. I just find Final Cut to be very intuitive and to be very well optimized, at least for my computer, and it just works well for me. I've tried in the past to work with Adobe, and it just was so unintuitive that I gave up very quickly and decided to just stick with Final Cut Pro, which is it's fine, right? Like plenty of people use Final Cut Pro. It's good. I like it a lot. But that's all I use a Mac for, really, is just the music and video production. Otherwise, I am using this custom-built PC in this massive Corsair 900D case. The specs that you probably care about are 32 gigs of RAM, a Ryzen 9 3900 XT, and a Asus Strix 3090. And I've got the, the cable mod white mesh cabling to make it all look pretty. I've got an Asuka statue and a Momo from To Love Ru statue in my PC, and I have like a very pink theme going on. Like I said earlier, I like pinks and purples. I really like those colors. So it might be a little girly for your tastes, but personally I'm a big fan of that aesthetic. Here my PC, I've got a triple monitor setup. I recently downsized to triple monitors. I used to have a 5 monitor setup, especially when I was streaming to Twitch a lot. I found that kind of useful, but I found it to be a little bit ridiculous, so I moved down to 3 monitors. The flanking monitors are Asus, just 1080p 60Hz monitors. It's kind of whatever. The primary one is a Samsung Odyssey Neo G something. It's a 4K 165Hz mini LED curved 32-inch monitor. And yes, it's a huge mouthful, but it is gorgeous. I'm a big fan of it, and even a 3090 struggles to push that many pixels at high frame rate on most modern games though. So it's a monitor that I'm gonna grow into over time. I'm probably gonna get a RTX 5090 at some point, maybe next year, when they inevitably come out with that, given that it's enough of a step up from the 4090. For peripherals here, I'm just using a Razer wireless Death Adder mouse. I just really like the ergonomics of the Death Adder, and it's not super overpriced or anything at this point, so I've stuck with those. I have the keyboard is relatively new actually. I decided to build this keyboard. It is a glorious GMMK Pro. It's an aluminum chassis and very, very heavy, which is kind of cool. I like things with heft to them, and I'm not moving it around anyway, so it doesn't matter. I swapped out the internal back plate for polycarbonate plate. It came with aluminum. I am using the Glorious's in-house Glorious Fox switches, I think is what they're called. They're linear switches with very light actuation, and they sound really nice to type on, as well as a Evangelion keycap set. So you got like the purple theme with Japanese writing, like Japanese characters as well as the standard Roman characters, and a nice wooden wrist rest, which I find very comfortable. Over here I've got some graded trading cards. Of course, I was really into the trading card craze during the pandemic, and I got some cards graded, both from companies like PSA, which I have a whole thing with now at this point that I don't like PSA. I have a video on that if you want to check that out. As well as a smaller grading company from Canada over in Ontario called MNT Grading. They're alright. Not the best for reselling, but that wasn't really my goal with a lot of these cards over here, so they're just for me. I do have something like 28% of the world's graded Hungry Burger cards. You can check PSA's population reports. I have most of them, or a lot of them. I have like a third of the world's graded Hungry Burger. I don't know, Hungry Burger is just kind of an amazing meme. I really like the Hungry Burger card. I wish that it was viable in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, but I highly doubt that that's ever going to come to fruition. Either way, just kind of a funny story that I can tell to say that I have this many graded Hungry Burgers. Actually, how many do I have? What do I? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I have 6 graded Hungry Burgers from PSA. Kind of silly, but you know, that's me. Over here we've got 3 3D printers. I recently just downsized from 5 3D printers, which is way too many, and I'm probably going to continue to downsize. Not that I'm 3D printing less than before, but I just don't need this many, and the industry has come a long way, and the newer printers are just so much better. So clearing out the old stuff, getting new stuff, and these are of course what I used to 3D print my fight sticks. Over here I'm sitting on a Secret Labs Titan Evo 2022 edition. This is like the best chair I've ever sat in. Not a sponsor, though I wish they were. Absolutely incredible. I've sat in very, very expensive ergonomic chairs, and they do not meet this one. This one is just so sturdy, so good. I don't care if you don't like the gamer aesthetic, like it is actually such a good chair regardless, with the adjustable like lumbar support, and it just feels like firm. Everything's like super solid. It is quite it's on the expensive side for like gamer chairs, quote unquote, but like this is, to me, this is more than a gamer chair, and I wanted to make sure that my back did not disintegrate, so I wanted something comfortable to sit in. You're probably wondering where I keep all of the peripherals for all of these game consoles. Like, where are the controllers? Well, unfortunately it's not as clean as I'd like it to be, and that's something that I'd like to come up with a solution for that looks cleaner in the future. But for now I'm just using these plastic bins that are labeled, and they are just in a separate room in the basement here. And yeah, it looks pretty messy, I will admit. I'll probably get something a bit higher end, maybe something made of wood, that has bigger drawers, because some of these are getting pretty full. Like, I have a lot of DualShock controllers, I have a lot of Xbox controllers, as you might imagine, and it gets pretty messy. It doesn't look the greatest, but it is not in the main area. The main area looks pretty clean, if I do say so myself. I do have some extra stuff. I have extra PCs in this crawl space down here. These PCs are used for LAN parties that I throw with my friends. I do that 3 to 4 times a year, so I decided to build some custom gaming PCs to offer people attending that maybe didn't have their own gaming PCs or didn't feel like bringing their own gaming PCs if they can only come for a few hours, kind of thing. Just one of the ways that I want to be more, just offer hospitality to my guests, and I think they're pretty cool. They're not like super high-end gaming PCs. They have like RX 580 graphics cards and then like mid-range Ryzen chips in them, but overall pretty fun. This white one here is the main LAN PC that I personally use, and this one's a bit higher end. It's got a Ryzen 5600 and a RTX 2080 Ti, as well as lots of pink RGB. Finally, we have the other crawl space, which is like a dirt floor crawl space, and this is kind of like the overflow space where I have a bunch of bins and they are filled with things like 8 Nintendo Wiis, a few more Zapit Gamewaves that are complete in box, and just miscellaneous peripherals that I don't need to be grabbing at very often, if ever. Unfortunately, I just don't have the space in the main room to keep like a million things out. It would look very messy very quickly. At some point in the future, if I move and I get a bigger basement, I would like to have like glass display cases or something to actually show off all my duplicate consoles. But for now, that's just not in the cards. If anything ever happens in regards to that, I will probably update you in a future game room tour. And last but not least, this is a wall of Pokemon, every Gen 1 Pokemon specifically, and I actually 3D printed these with the 3D printers that you saw earlier in the video. Fun party trick that I like to tell people is that even the shelves that they are sitting on were actually 3D printed as well. Pretty cool, huh? Truth be told, I did these quite early on when I was first getting into 3D printing, so they are not, let's just say some of them didn't come out as good as they could have with my current knowledge of 3D printing and slicing models. So if I were to redo it, I think that I could do a better job. At some point I might redo some of the worse ones here, but it makes for a pretty cool background when I'm streaming or when I have my face on camera here for videos like this. But until then, I think that's just about everything. I will inevitably think of something while I'm editing perhaps, but if not, thank you so much for watching this game room tour. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I didn't ramble too much, wasn't too boring, and that this wasn't too long. But rest assured, if it was for you, my regular scheduled programming will be returning soon with some chill video game culture essays. If you are still around, still watching right now, I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much for being subscribed to me. And on the off chance that you've watched this far and you are not yet subscribed, please consider subscribing to the channel. It would mean a lot to me. Alrighty everyone, thank you so much. I'll see you in the next one.